and welcome to the Spooky Cyber Story Club. My name is Matt, also known as WitchyPurpleSec. I'm an information security professional, public speaker, privacy advocate, Halloween obsessive, horror aficionado, and complete nerd. If you've worked in InfoSec, IT, or anything adjacent, there is a feeling almost all of us have experienced. That message in your inbox, the alert from your SIM, the text from your on-call rotation, or the phone call from your SOC saying something went wrong. It's that sinking feeling in your stomach that there's been a catastrophic failure, or worse, that a breach has occurred. Often these alerts hit after hours when you're recovering from the chaos of a standard workday. It's a level of discomfort every colleague I've ever had can describe in great detail. One of those career-defining moments when you get pushed close to your breaking point. It's the same feeling you get when you walk through a haunted house at Halloween or experience a jump scare in your favorite movie or video game. A fear that something out of your control has happened, but the understanding that it will be your responsibility to address it. I've found over the course of my career that I've learned more from things that didn't work than I ever did from things that went smoothly. Success always felt like one item checked off a never-ending list, often glossed over and never celebrated, while failures always led to introspection. Questioning the events that led up to a failure, incident, or near miss left me reflecting on lessons learned and what I could have done better. Even now, when I work with teams reviewing events, products, procedures, or services, I find myself pointing out potential failures from my own experiences. A lot of the time, I find this helps colleagues avoid pitfalls I've already suffered through, like some sort of ghastly failure clairvoyance. This is what led to the creation of this show. I wanted to talk to information security professionals about how they endured during their worst days, the ones we all fear, the dreaded cyber incident. Every day and all over the world, InfoSec professionals ward off attacks, but what happens when the bad guys win? How do you recover? The format for future episodes is simple. Less scripted content, more discussion. I'll bring in InfoSec professionals to tell their spooky cyber stories. Think of it like the digital equivalent of telling horror stories around a campfire. Instead of ghosts and goblins, we'll talk incidents and bad actors. Through their stories, we'll uncover what went wrong, reliving the worst possible day an InfoSec professional could have, allowing the larger community to gain the knowledge without living through the incident. To drive the conversation, we'll walk through three basic components of incident response: detection, response, and recovery. Once we understand what went wrong and how our guests endured the problem, we'll discuss their lessons learned and how they improved their InfoSec program as a result. Through their horror stories, I hope to help the larger cybersecurity community avoid the same traps and pitfalls. I think it's only fair on episode 0 to share one of my own stories, both as a warning and an example of things to come. At a certain point in my career, I worked for a small company with a limited IT and cybersecurity staff. As a result, I split my time between both departments. One particular day stands out in my mind. I'd been up for most of the night addressing a handful of operational IT issues that were causing problems with production. I still showed up for work the next day, but my manager had asked that I head home early if I could to get some rest. I worked around 3/4 of my standard shift before I finally cleared enough of my queue to head home for the day. As I packed my equipment up and was getting ready to leave, we received an alert about some odd traffic hitting one of our endpoints. Strange requests were being made from an internal IP to an endpoint on non-standard ports, and these were being stopped by our endpoint detection and response tool. I saw some chatter in our IT group chat about the issue, and I'd only made it as far as the parking lot, so I headed back to my desk and turned my equipment on. By this time, I'd been awake for nearly 24 hours. I was exhausted, I was not thinking clearly, but it didn't matter. This was an emergency, and we needed all hands on deck. While investigating the issue, we narrowed the traffic source down to one particular switch in the office. It handled a small quadrant in one corner of the office used by our call center. We hadn't been able to attach the traffic to a particular user, so we were using the IP as a pivot point to narrow down where it was coming from. I wanted to see what port the source IP was using so I could track it back to a physical location, drop connectivity to the port. I popped a PuTTY window and attempted to SSH to the switch in question. No response. We'd been having issues with our switches for a few weeks, and I'd asked one of the members of IT to check each switch and address any connectivity issues they came across. I quickly pinged IT to see if they'd done the work. They admitted they hadn't had time to address it. As time passed, nearly the entire security and IT teams had set up shop near my desk, creating a tiny war room. Most of the IT team had reverted to simply notifying the security team about new alerts as they arrived, unable to provide any further context. At this point, we were getting alerts across our DHCP range, all coming from that initial source IP we'd identified. Discussions flew about blocklisting the IP or MAC address, but we had concerns that they would just hop IPs or leverage a MAC changer. I undocked my laptop and headed to the closet that contained the switch in question. I plugged directly into it via USB and popped my PuTTY window, finally seeing the login screen I'd been hoping for. By this time, we'd seen even more chatter from across our EDR, across the entire office, and now alerts were triggering in our SIM. Things were pretty loud. We knew something or someone on our network was scanning different ports and attempting logins. Having followed me into the switch closet, the entire war room was now standing shoulder to shoulder in that tiny closet. Everyone was trying various tools, calling out ideas, as servers and cooling units whirred all around us. As I attempted to sign in, I kept getting error after error. At this point, it was either an issue with the switch or my exhaustion, causing me to mistype the password I'd typed 100 times before. In the meantime, one of my colleagues was scouring the SIM and our DHCP server for any connections that looked odd. Suddenly they said, "I see a weird DNS entry. Something called hacknook1. Before he'd even finished the DNS name, I knew exactly what the device was. I turned to my manager, who stood just over my right shoulder. He looked me squarely in the eye and said, "Please don't kill me." It was a remote penetration testing box provided by our external pen testers. My manager had sneakily attached it to one of the ports in an empty office as an impromptu red teaming engagement to see if we would notice it and if we'd be able to track it down. I finally got into the network gear, tracked it back to one of the manager's offices, walked into the room, and there it sat, a tiny black box plugged into a port underneath their desk. And with that, the incident was over. Our detection efforts had proven valuable. Both our SIM and EDR tools had generated alerts about the traffic. With a little massaging, we were able to correlate some of the events between tools. Our response efforts, however, were lacking. Tools didn't work, and the team was dependent on just a handful of people to track these alerts down. In this case, I was one of those people, and I was exhausted and not thinking clearly. I was struggling to focus, and it was impacting my usual speed logging into our tools and managing my response flow. Having access to the network gear directly would have helped us respond more efficiently, but we only had access to about half the tools we needed. We also had no visibility or alerting when it came to a device being attached to our network. In our case, we were lucky. Our spooky creature turned out to be one of our friends wearing a hockey mask, jumping out of a bush and trying to scare us. We were so lucky, in fact, we didn't have anything to recover from. So what were the lessons learned? We realized that we only caught this rogue device because the pen tester was operating loud. You see, they didn't know about the impromptu red teaming exercise, and they were making no effort to obfuscate or hide their traffic. If they were a real bad actor, toning down the scan rate, we may have never found them. They may have been undetectable to us. We decided to review our SIM alerts and look for new places around the network that we could plant honeypots as an early detection system. At the time, our honeypots were focused mainly on our server ranges. We didn't really have anything in our DHCP or end user ranges. In our case, we also discovered that having a small team could cause an issue with coverage. With me having worked so long into the previous night, I couldn't be at my best. My brain was even so scrambled I couldn't remember to check DHCP for the name of the device before focusing on locating the physical location. Working to create an on-call rotation for operational issues would have helped ensure the coverage the night before so no single team member the next day would be burned out. Secondarily, we realized that the security team had more knowledge about identifying an issue and responding than the IT team did. We needed playbooks. We needed everyone to understand how to walk through the proper incident response steps. The more eyes on the investigation, the more prepared an alert we could be. If an alert had been generated when the Nook device was added to the network, or we had MAC ACLs in place, we could have prevented the box from getting on the network without us knowing. When it came to the issue signing into some of our vital equipment, we realized we needed to assess prioritization with the larger group. Maybe if the security team had been more clear that the switch checks were a high priority, things would have gone differently. Had the equipment been accessible during the initial alerts, we may have been able to track down the port, disable it, and go to the physical location faster. We decided to do a health check on all of our primary and failover network equipment and ensure connectivity. There are thousands of stories from all walks of life we can learn from as a larger community. My story was simple, and since the adversary ended up being a test by someone I knew, the danger level was relatively low. Not everyone's experiences are as low risk as mine was. Through this show, I hope to share those stories and help InfoSec practitioners avoid those phone calls, texts, and alerts we all fear the most. But for now, we've run out of time. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can visit my website, WitchyPurpleSec.com. I hope you'll consider sharing and subscribing to this show to help me get the word out. Thanks for listening to my spooky cyber story here on the Spooky Cyber Story Club. I'm WitchyPurpleSec, and I'll see you next time.